No matter how old you are, stories are relevant to our daily lives. When they were little, they gave us lessons about our world, and as adults, they give us hidden truths about our lives. The idea of stories being used for education is not a new idea. In fact, it's quite old. Stories have been used in such a way since the ancient times, but what if those stories hold more truth than we were led to believe? Many religions and mythologies have stories and beliefs that are interconnected on a massive scale. By looking at some of their individual stories like flood myths, those connections pave the way for understanding the ancient world our ancestors inhabited. I have always been interested in past mythologies and how their significance connects to our lives. In fact, I'm often found buried in videos or books on the subject, and it is that wanting to learn more and passion that I bring to you today. When all is said and done, I hope that you have a better understanding of why ancients used myths, how they were connected across cultures, and what that connectedness can mean for us today. If you've ever spent time researching the ancients, you know how much of their cultures relied on myths, but what exactly were they, and how were they used? Myths were often used to explain something that ancient peoples couldn't. For example, they didn't have scientific terms or understandings of how certain things in the world worked at the time. For example, when we think of volcanoes, we think of tectonic plates shifting and magma rising through the ground and through a mountain. Other ancient religions, like the Chinese, for example, believed that there were dragons that lived underneath mountains, and when the dragons awoke, so too did the mountain, and they spewed magma into what we now call a volcano. Many mythologies were very similar in that way, where they all tried to explain something with stories that they could not explain, which is why a lot of mythologies and myths have why a lot of religions and mythologies have connectedness in how they produce their myths, because they are all talking about the same thing and they all live in the same world. Today, I'm choosing to cover flood myths because of how many religions have them. You can find them in ancient peoples of North America, ancient peoples of Asia. If you are Christian, you know about the Noah's flood in the Bible, in the book of Genesis. It is myths like these that completely shape what we know about ancient mythologies, and a lot of how we view our world today comes from what our ancestors told us back then. Now that you have some background on the importance of myths and stories, I'd like to share a few with you. All of my information I gathered from the PBS article, A Flood of Myths and Stories by Lenley Keep. In this day and age, a lot of people know the Christian story of Noah's flood, but I'm going to go over it just to refresh your memory one more time. So the story goes in the book of Genesis that God was fed up with humanity being sinful, and that he sent a great flood, but he spared one man, Noah, to build a giant ark so that he and his family could repopulate the earth, along with putting 2 of each kind of animal on board to help that repopulation. So they built this massive ark and they set off on the flood when it began, and they stayed like that for 7 days until the rain stopped. When the rain stopped, he sent out a dove 3 times. The first time it came back with nothing. The second day it came back again with nothing. But on the third day it came back with an olive branch, symbolizing that it was safe to get off the boat. After that, and after they had gotten off the boat, Noah and his wife were able to repopulate the earth along with all the animals that they had saved and brought on that boat. Like the Christian story, ancient Mesopotamia had a very similar myth in their story of Gilgamesh. In the story, Gilgamesh is trying to figure out how he can be immortal, so he goes to the immortal man, Unipiththem, who is immortal, and he tells the story about how he survived a great flood. And in the story, he explains that the gods had created a flood, and he was spared because he was told about it and the fact that he had to create a great boat, and he and his family went on the boat. But what's different between his story and the Christian story is that, unlike bringing animals on the ship, he brought the seeds of every flowering plant. So after the flood, just like Noah, he rode on it in a boat with all of these, with his family and all of these creatures and seeds. And after the flooding and the rain had stopped, he sent out 3 different birds. On the first day, he sent out a dove like Noah, and like Noah, it came back with nothing. On the second day, he sent out a sparrow, and the sparrow came back. But on the third day, he sent back a raven, and the raven never came back, which symbolized to him that it was safe for him to get off the boat and repopulate the world with his wife and the seeds that they had brought with them. The third myth that I'm going to be going over is the ancient Greek myth about the Greek flood. And this one is very similar. Like the first two, it has a vengeful god who is fed up with humanity. In this one, it's Zeus, and he is fed up with humanity, and he decides that he's going to create a big flood to cover the earth. But one man and wife is spared when they figure out what's happening, so they create a big box, and he and his wife get in the box, and they float over the flood. And when it's safe for them to get out, they do, but then they are tasked with repopulating the earth, but how to do that when there's only two of them got very tricky. So what they decided to do, with the help of the gods, was to throw stones over their shoulders. The stones that the woman threw became women, and the stones that the man threw became men. All of these stories are similar in the fact that they have vengeful gods and people that have to repopulate the earth and boarding some kind of vessel so that they can be protected until that flood ends. It is myths like these that brought how the ancients saw the world to life. It is also through these that they had glimpses to the truth of their world. I've explained all of this to explain that it is theorized that the flood really happened. In the Smithsonian article, Evidence for a Flood, it goes over the fact that there is a theory that the Black Sea caved out a path between what was the Black Sea, which was a freshwater pond or lake, and saltwater nearby. And so this freshwater ran through that path in the ground to the saltwater and became what we now know as the Black Sea. It is theorized by the people who have done this research that it would have been so large and so loud that people would have been able to see it coming a mile a day, and that it would have been a roar like none of these people had ever seen before. So if you were living in that time and had no scientific evidence of what was happening, you would have thought, oh gosh, it's the end of the world. And so because of how they thought about the world, they would have created stories to explain it, that they would have then passed down to the people that were under them and the people that they needed to explain this to. And because, like all myths and stories, they need a heroine, they eventually spread wings about the people that repopulated the earth and the vengeful gods that created such an enormous flood. And the reason why this flood is so iconic is because it really shows that the myths that we think of as fictional were used as an educational purpose. The myth of the flood that we have thought about for so long could have very well happened and brought about a new kind of understanding and fear in the people of the time. It is very strange to wonder what kind of impact such a large flood would have had on the world and its inhabitants, but thanks to our ancestors, we have an idea. We know about our world through what has been passed down to us, some of that information in the form of stories. It is stories like these that have guided and shaped human culture and its bonds. By looking at these stories, we can glimpse the lives of ancient peoples and their connected insights to the world. Much of how we look at mythologies is fictional, yet if we take a moment and look at the stories for their truth, a whole new array of possibilities are open. The next time you are in need of something to do, I challenge you to look up an ancient myth. You may just find a parallel between your life and something from long ago. Thank you.